Welcome everybody to our fourth and final class in the series on wisdom from the Bible, aging through the ages, wisdom from the Bible, the rabbis and contemporary thought. And this is session 4, and we'll be talking about legacy. The time to start is now. So the introductory quotes for this week both come from Proverbs, which always has some good quotes. And the first is Proverb 13, the first part of the proverb: a good man has what to bequeath to his grandchildren. And because I wanted to be an equal opportunity employer, the second proverb is from the next chapter, chapter 14, the wisest of women builds her house. And today's agenda: we're going to review the last class as we usually do. We'll talk about what is a legacy. From the biblical perspective, I'll be looking at preserving and creating a legacy, and I'll be talking to one specific narrative in the text, the daughters of Zelophehad. And Susan will provide us with a modern perspective on legacy, creating legacy. The rabbi, of course, will bring us some rabbinic wisdom. We'll summarize and close and have a Q&A. But before I actually start the formal part, I wanted to share an anecdote with you. We were in Shul on Shabbat, and Dan had his father's yahrzeit, and he got up at the end of the service to say Kaddish. And Jack, my 5-year-old grandson, said to me, "Why is Grandpa standing up?" And I said, "Well, he's remembering his father. You may know his name is Grandpa Bob." And he said, "Oh, right. Daddy's middle name is Robert. That's who he's named after." And I thought to myself, Bill, this is a gift if I'm going to teach a class on legacy. Because for some of us, our legacies begin with the names that we receive. So we learn about the people that we're named after, and we then make our own interpretations of that name, and that's part of our legacy. And in that regard, I'd like to make this class in honor of my new granddaughter, Noah Edie, and you'll see why. Noah, N-O-A, and you'll see why her name is so important to legacy. So just a quick review of the last session, which was on family and friends. From a biblical perspective, we learned that honoring others, including parents, is a fundamental principle in the Tanakh, and that the book of Proverbs, or Mishlei, suggests that honoring one's parents and successful interpersonal relationships with friends are behaviors that help to preserve the social order. We also read the story from the book of Ruth that presents what I would say is an idealized example of the importance of family and friends to individuals and to society as a whole. From a modern perspective, we learn that there is a wide range of resources that we can use to provide guidance and support in practicing the values of honor and respect that contribute to the well-being and the dignity of our parents and elders. We learn that we should be aware of and choose to adopt healthy lifestyles that support healthy aging. These may include receiving assistance that helps us maintain our ability to do the things we want to do for as long as possible. We also learned that there are many ways for older adults to use their wisdom and life experiences and remain engaged with family, friends, and community in meaningful ways. Be planful. The time to act is before a crisis. And I just wanted to note that Susan provided us with, in her last slide, I think, with some wonderful resources. And if anybody would like a copy of those resources, just text me or email me, and Susan will be very happy to provide. From the rabbinic perspective, in our class on family and friends, we learned that to revere your mother and father means not sitting in their assigned seat, not publicly disagreeing with them, and not choosing sides when one of the parents is in a disagreement with someone else. Honor your father and mother means providing for them directly or with an aid to make sure that they have food and drink, proper clothes, and the ability to get in and out of their home for errands, to do essential tasks, or to socialize. When we can, we should fulfill the mitzvah of honoring our parents by personally helping them as they age. That being said, an adult child can hire health aid workers to look after their parents, but children should be present and assist when they can. In addition, there are limits to what a parent can ask their children. They must not make demands that are so taxing that they are actually putting a stumbling block before their children. This means if a parent were to overtax their children or make unrealistic demands, it could lead their children to be disrespectful of them, which we know they should not do. Okay, so legacy, what is it? Merriam-Webster Dictionary gives us two definitions. One is a gift by will, especially of money or other personal property. And the second is that something that is transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past, like one's name in some cases, although not all cases, as in my granddaughter Noah, it was a name that my children loved and had more meaning to it than they even knew it had. So, preserving and creating a legacy. Let's learn about these wonderful daughters of Zelophehad. And I love this picture that I found on Chabad's website. I have no idea who made it, but I just thought it was a great picture of working women, working the land. So when the Israelites were approaching the promised land, God ordered Moses to take a census of all the males over the age of 20 to determine the share of land that would be apportioned to them once they went into the land. The purpose was to apportion the land within the listing of various clans, and we read that Zelophehad had no sons, only daughters. As females, they were not entitled to apportionment. Zelophehad is part of the generation of Israelites who departed from Egypt under Moses' leadership and died during the 40 years in the wilderness. Zelophehad had 5 daughters, Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They were of the tribe of Manasseh, and actually that made them descendants of Joseph. And these daughters were concerned that they would have no legacy as the men had by getting the land of their fathers who may have passed away in the desert. So from the text, we learn that the names of daughters were Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction of Korach's faction, which banded together against Yahweh, but died for his own sin, and he left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us Tenulanu," which is a form of speech that is almost an order. It's not a please. It's a give us, a holding among our father's kinsmen. So let's look at this verse as we haven't had much of a chance to actually take apart verses this class, but this one is a beauty. First of all, there are 5 daughters, and each of them is named. And we know when a character in the Bible is named, that gives them considerable amount of importance, because many unnamed characters exist, and specifically they're unnamed because they're considered unimportant. And these women stood before not just Moses, but the head priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly. And so they were standing before the entire leadership of the Israelite people at that time. It was a profound, you have to think about it. 5 women in front of all of these men. And not only were they standing in front of all of the leadership, but they were standing in a very significant place in the desert. They were standing at the tent of meeting, which is where Moses went to consult with God, and it was sort of the central part of the camp. So these 2 verses indicate to us how important this story is within the context of the biblical narrative. So what do they say? They say our father died in the wilderness. So they're identifying who they are. They are children of the first generation that came out of Egypt, and were basically, God said that they would not be able to go into the land. They would die in the wilderness. So he was part of that generation. He was also not one of the faction, which was Korach's faction. Korach was a rebel against Moses, and they banded together against Moses and Yahweh. And so the women are saying, here's our father. He was not part of the rebellious faction. They say that he died for his own sin, which in biblical times, it was considered that if your death may be as a consequence of your sins, but the point being, it was his own sin. It wasn't his sin along with the others. And he left no sons. So they're presenting their case, and they're presenting it very clearly. And then they make their ask. They say, let not our father's name be lost to his clan, because he has no son. This is the preservation of a name, the preservation of a family was extremely important in this tribal community. So they are, and they are very simply asking, almost ordering, that their father's land be given to them so that their father's name can be preserved. And since this was an unprecedented issue, Moses brought their demand directly before Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Moses, the plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen and transfer their father's share to them. This is amazing. Moses goes to God, and God doesn't hesitate. There's no, this is it. The decision is made. And in what we normally think of as a very patriarchal story, these women have now gotten what they were hoping for. And Yahweh continued, further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, you shall assign his property to his nearest relative in his own clan, who shall inherit it. This shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with Yahweh's command to Moses. Thus, from the plea of these sisters, the laws of inheritance were established. Now, sometimes we have stories in the Bible which confirm existing laws. And so this may be one of those stories that gives us the foundation for this inheritance law, which is really to me, seems somewhat radical in such a patriarchal society. Barbara, did you have a question?
No, no, I had a comment having to do with legacies and the daughters of Zelophehad. You may not know this, but our synagogue, Temple Beth Israel in Port Washington, has a Torah binder. It's not right now, it's not around any of the Torahs, but I always wanted to be around Torah on the week when we read about the daughters of Zelophehad, because on this Torah binder, which was made by Shula and by Jerry Blum, members of the congregation took legacy items and embroidered them on. For instance, Mary Lou Cowman's nightgown button is on there. Jerry Blum's Hebrew school charm bracelet with all her awards is on there. One of my mother-in-law's earrings is on there, and so on and so forth. And the text of one of the sentences about the daughters of Zelophehad is on there. So it really is a legacy item, and we should all thank Jerry Blum for the idea. And we should try to remember to use it every once in a while.
That's great. That's a great, that speaks to how important this story is. Thank you, Barbara. And I will look for that. Okay, so later in the text, we learn that the male members of the tribe of Menashe point out that when the daughters of Zelophehad get married, the land that they had inherited will go with them to the clans, to the clans of their husbands, leading to diminution of the tribal land holdings. Moses announces that Moses here, without consulting with God, announces that God does not intend any moving of land from tribe to tribe. As insurance against such movement, the daughters of Zelophehad and any other daughters who inherit land must marry within the clan of their father's tribe. And so we learn that these young women did that, young or middle-aged or however old they were of marriageable age. And in the book of Joshua, we learn that the daughters do marry within their clan and eventually receive their inheritance. And we read, the names of the daughters were Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They appeared before the priest Eleazar, before Joshua, son of Nun, and the chieftain, saying, the Lord commanded Moses to grant us a portion among our male kinsmen. So in accordance with the Lord's instructions, they were granted a portion among their father's kinsmen. Now, it might be considered interesting that they seemed to be rebellious by asking for something that had never happened before. But at the same time, they understood that there were rules that needed to be followed in order for their father's legacy to be passed along. And they were willing to follow those rules at that time. Actually, as I found in Wikipedia, the principle of the daughters having to marry within the tribe disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple because there was no allocation according to tribe. So while they were willing to do this, and it clearly emphasizes that one of their goals was to maintain the legacy of their father. The biblical scholar Tikva Frymer-Kensky explains, and we've read her in many of our classes, and she's just such a brilliant scholar. Biblical Israel considered the extirpation of lineage, which is called karet, the worst fate that could befall anyone. Karet means actually to be cut off. The biblical investment in the survival of a lineage is so intense that the daughters of Zelophehad relied on it as their trump card when they petitioned to inherit their father's estate. And we saw this theme in the book of Ruth last week, when Boaz became the Redeemer and redeemed Elimelech's land and married Naomi. And consequently, the land that had been Elimelech's and his name continued on. And this can be found in other biblical narratives, oftentimes, interestingly, involving women. And this piece of art is from an Israeli artist named Avner Moriah. And he made the connection also between the daughters who are on the top register, and they're standing behind the priests and they're standing before Moses. And so we see them there. And then in the second register, going from right to left, we see Boaz and the Redeemer and his marriage to Ruth, Naomi, his marriage to Ruth, and the consequences of that marriage. I just wanted to point out that I found this in Sefaria, but it comes from a website that it's really interesting website called 929, and which comes from Sefaria, but it's an interesting website, and so if you ever have an opportunity to look at it, I would highly recommend it. They have a lot of art in 929. So in addition to the legal achievements of the daughters of Zelophehad, there is a spiritual component for people of all ages. Since we are talking about aging in this class. And this comes from a woman's commentary to the Torah, which is from the Union of Reformed Judaism. It's a wonderful book, a wonderful Tanakh. And they say, the story of these 5 women offers a compelling lesson for all those who believe that their destiny is fixed or that divine justice has abandoned them. It encourages us to think differently and provides a message of hope for all those faced with obstacles. And how many times this semester, so to speak, have we talked about the obstacles that people who are aging might face and the obstacles that people who care for them might face? Perhaps the most important legacy of Zelophehad's daughters is their call to us to take hold of life in our own hands, to move from the place that the others have given us or that we have decided to keep because we feel immobile, and to walk even to the most holy center, to where nobody seems to be able to go. After all, nothing is more sacred than life itself and the fight for what we believe is worthy. Thus, in this parsha, this parsha inspires us to discover that we too have the ability to know what is right for ourselves and what our rights ought to be when we believe in our capacity to shape history to the point of being able to change even a law that came from the revelation at Sinai. We all pay tribute to Zelophehad's daughters. I thought this was just a beautiful and inspiring quote, and speaks, yeah, Barbara. No? I thought you raised your hand, I'm sorry. So it's a beautiful and inspiring quote. It speaks to our power as individuals to confront obstacles, our power as individuals to try to change things, our power as individuals to seek out what is helpful to us and what is helpful to others. And so it speaks to healthy aging, it speaks to legacy, and it speaks to friends and family, and basically speaks to all of the themes that we've gone through in this class. So I'm going to stop my sharing now, and I'm going to pass this along to Susan, who's going to speak in more practical terms.
For the contemporary perspective for today's class, I'm going to talk about ethical wills as a tool that can be used to share our legacy. So ethical wills are a Jewish tradition, and they began in biblical times and have continued through the centuries up to the present day. And today, ethical wills are created by people of different ages, genders, faiths, ethnicities, education, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And ethical wills are also referred to sometimes as legacy letters. So what an ethical will is not, it's not a binding document, and it's not a document that does not designate material goods or assets to others. So it's not what we think of as a traditional will. However, ethical wills are sometimes used to provide context and background about why something is designated to someone. Might include their emotional value, maybe the family and generational value as well. And ethical wills can also provide personal reflections on tzedakah and charitable giving. But what an ethical will is an opportunity to share one's values, life experiences, lessons learned, hopes for generations to come, wisdom, expressions of love, and more. So when do we start an ethical will? Well, we can start it at any age. It can help us reflect on our lives, what is important to us, what values we want to share, and it can also help us to think about how we want to live our lives. It's non-binding. It can be reviewed, added to, and amended over time. And as we age, there might be new experiences and that we want to share, such as our spirituality, perhaps reflections on family time and relationships, advocacy work, volunteerism, mentoring and achievements, charitable giving, many of the things that we've talked about that we might turn to as we have more time to pursue other aspects of our lives. So ethical wills can take many forms. They can be handwritten, they can be electronic, so that we can do them on a computer, but they can also take other art forms. It could be a video or a poem or a play, anything that we might think of. Because it is our own piece of work, we can make it anything that we wish it to be. And so it can be brief, it can be just a paragraph, and I shouldn't say just, it can be a paragraph just to our families, giving blessings and sharing a few values, or it can be many pages. So an ethical will can be for our children and extended family and future generations, but it also can be used and addressed to an organization, a school, or friends that have been integral to our lives. And many times the ethical will become a cherished heirloom. And so I'm just going to give you a few resources. There are so many resources if you start looking, both Jewish and non-sectarian, and some resources can be books going over the history of ethical wills and sharing ethical wills through the ages. There are videos, and there are also many workshops in communities, both in synagogues and in the general community. So I'm just going to share a couple of resources that are easy to access. And one of them is Jewish Family and Children's Services of Southern Arizona, who I work with. We've been doing ethical wills for many years, both in the synagogue and in the general community. And there is on the site, there is a workbook, a free downloadable workbook, not very long, easy to look at and use, and a short video by Rabbi Stephanie Aaron, who facilitates these workshops. So it's an easy access, something to look at as you think about possibly doing an ethical will. And I noticed that coming this week, AARP of New York is offering 2 free webinars. You don't need to be a member to register for it. And one is called Saging, Creating and Sharing Your Legacy, which is this coming week. And Learn About Legacy Letters is going to follow that following week with a couple of other sessions. So you can see that ethical wills have come from a Jewish tradition and have become widely used throughout the community. And that's a tool I wanted to share with you, and take a look at some of these resources and on the web, and be creative as you like with an ethical web.
Thank you, Susan. It's interesting because the daughters of Zelophehad, in a sense, had their own ethical will by going in front of Moses and asking for that land, and maintaining their father's name, and indicating that that was so important to them. Thank you very much. And another thank you will come later. Rabbi, your turn.
Great. Thank you, Annette. And thank you, Susan. Wonderful to see everyone here. I'm going to try to share something with everyone. Okay. Let's see. You may have to move your gallery of people if it's blocking. I called this on making and leaving a legacy, because we leave a legacy. Let's misspell, excuse me for that. We leave a legacy, but we first have to make a legacy. And wherever we are in life, it's still part of our legacy. If you want your legacy to be a little different, you have the opportunity to do that. God willing, you look back on your life and you see things that you like, but there may be more chapters to write, if you so choose. But hopefully you do, not only to live a meaningful and good life, but also to leave the legacy of how you've impacted the world, and the legacy of those who have seen you act, especially the younger generation. That's something that you leave with them, So we really can continue to work on our legacies until physically we can't anymore. So I want to start out with a quote from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. Each person has a Torah unique to that person, his or her innermost teaching. Some seem to know their Torahs very early in life and speak and sing them in a myriad of ways. Others spend their whole lives stammering, shaping, and rehearsing them. Some are long, some are short, some are intricate and poetic, others are only a few words, and still others can only be spoken through gesture and example. But every soul has a Torah. We all have a purpose, we all have meaning, a way to impact the people around us and the world around us in a powerful way that's uniquely ours. And that is part of what our legacy is, both, again, just for doing whatever the actions, whatever we're bringing to the world, but also that's something that we can pass on. And, we shouldn't really compare ourselves to other people. I mean, we can compare ourselves to other people if other people are more active, in the world, and we want to be more active, but not in terms of what gifts and talents different people have, are blessed with certain gifts. Some people have larger families, smaller families. We shouldn't really compare. We should find out what's most meaningful to us and how we want to impact those around us in the world. It's kind of, if we approach it with our neshama, with our soul, with our heart, then we'll be able to bring that out into the world, and we'll also leave that as our legacy. Dr. Linda Thal was a co-author of, Aging Wisely? And she wrote, "When we begin to think about legacy, we notice that the story of our lives extends backward before we were born, just as it will continue forward beyond our lifetime. Our legacies include what we have inherited from the past and how that has influenced the shape of our lives. Accordingly, we need to look in both directions. We ask, what have we done with that inheritance? And in what ways does our life ripple outward from it beyond ourselves?" And I love this because, when we think of a legacy, it's not just our own legacy of what we're doing and what we're leaving, but really the legacy that we've been given, the legacy that was left for us. And so, it takes the earlier thought and teaching from Rabbi Kushner and expands it a little bit. It's not our probably what I would say is our individual Torah is directly influenced by our ancestors, both more generally and also in a particular way. But it's a really powerful way to think about legacy. It's part of a continuum. And hopefully we honor the legacies of the people who came before us by what we do in the world, and then we leave that for others. And something that's sort of connects to this idea is this very famous teaching in the Shema, V'shinantam levanecha. It's in the V'hafta paragraph, V'dibarta bam, B'shivtecha b'veitecha, Uvlechtecha v'derech, Uvshachbecha uvkumecha, right? Teach them to your children and speak of them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. And I want to share with you a teaching from Art Green based on this idea. He says, if you were to ask me what single precept of Judaism as the one to which Jews feel the greatest commitment, I could answer completely without hesitation. You shall teach them diligently to your children. The commandment to educate, to pass the legacy of tradition and its knowledge onward from generation to generation. Jews have a particularly strong awareness that our lives serve as bridges between those who came before us and those who will come after us. Each of us is a living link between our grandparents and our grandchildren. And I think it's really powerful to think about this in a Jewish way, in terms of what Jewish values, Jewish ideas, rituals, and holidays are most important to us. And if we are, talking about them and acting on them in a way which lets the next generation know how important they are to us. But it doesn't just have to be Jewish things. It can be other things that are related to Jewish values and Jewish ideas, or even separate from them. But really, what are those most important things that we feel we need to make a great effort to pass on to the next generation? And lastly, I want to leave us with a poem by someone named Billy Collins. Actually, I didn't look him up, but I don't believe he's Jewish. It's just it's a wonderful poem about legacy. Fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight, was my mother's usual response to my bouts of childhood whining. I can't find my other sneaker. Fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight. There's no one to play with this early. Fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight. My bicycle only has 3 gears. Fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight. It's a line best delivered in a rural Irish accent, but my mother didn't have one of those growing up on a farm in Ontario, Canada, nor did she have much Canada in her voice. Fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight, was not heard in the hallways of our house. Needless to say, I never fell for it, though it did create pauses in my trickle of complaints. It maybe cleared some room in my room, strewn with toys, small tanks, and smaller soldiers. A little space to think about God and eyesight, but not for long, of course, the demands of childhood, being what they are. And the repeated words sometimes made me think twice before whimpering about a bruise on my knee, or foolishly I would say the line just when she did, the two of us chanting, fall to your knees, which is as far as I got before she appeared in the doorway and pinned me to the floor with that look. No surprise to know that nowadays I say it every chance I get, to everyone under this roof, including the dog, and under my breath to people on the street, this one grousing about the price of eggs or gasoline, that one furious that the bus is late, especially when I realize those voices are mine. Me peevish in the bedroom, me bitching about the rain, me and my broken shoelace, me in the sand trap, me forgetting to fall on my knees to thank her for giving me the eyes to see the world, to regard these words. And I'll end with that, Annette.
Thank you, Rabbi. That's beautiful. Thank you. And thank everybody. I think what we can gain primarily from this is that legacy doesn't just affect us as we get older, but it affects us pretty much from the day we're born. and creating a legacy and where our legacy comes from. When we're coming to this season of the holiday of Pesach, there's no better time to think about legacy. However we're celebrating the holiday, it's still, we know it to be we're celebrating our great legacy of freedom. And I just have to say, as you know, I'm really sensitive about this, but we pray for the freedom for all good people in this world. And so I wish you joyous and thought-provoking Pesach. But I also really want at this point, does anybody have questions and answers? Because I just want to do a final comment. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Wait, hold on. Judy, do you have something? You're on mute.
You know, this was the most beautiful, it was such a beautiful presentation on everybody's part. I just wish I could just capture it, especially the things that, the quotes that you had, Rabbi. I mean, I know this is maybe, I guess, from the recording, maybe that's a way of savoring it, but I really love to savor this whole presentation. I thought it was wonderful. I wish, and my only comment is I wish I would have realized some of these things when I was younger. That's all. But it was great. And I want to, you know, really, I love all the quotes and all the PowerPoint presentations this time around. So I want to thank you, Susan and Rabbi and Annette. This is great. Timing couldn't have been perfect, more perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And I have to say that each and every one of you on this call, because I know you all, some of you better than others, but you're all part of my legacy. But I especially want to thank Susan. We came up with this idea, I don't know how many years ago, Susan, right? Of doing something modern and something from the Bible. And Susan has, I want to thank the rabbi, and I want to thank Rabbi Perlman for her presentations as well. But Susan really stepped up to the plate. She did it out of love. And I just want to thank her for just being such a great partner. And to be able to say that your sister-in-law is your partner is pretty cool. I have to say that.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And it's really been nice to see everyone online and be a part of this.
Barbara, I know you have a question, and we're going to take more questions and comments in just a minute. Let me just see if I can share for a second. No, I don't see it. Susan, as a thank you for participating in this, we got you this book by Abraham. It's a book about Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's part of the Jewish Live series, and it just came out in the last year. It's a remarkable story about Heschel. Even so, hadn't read his biography before. I'd read a lot of his writings, and one of the places that it touches on is one of the first times he got involved in political life was during the Eisenhower administration. There was a national conference on the elderly, and Heschel was invited to speak. He has some famous quotes from his presentation, but of course he was involved in many other things as well. We've also made a contribution in your honor to an incredible organization in Jerusalem called Yad L'Kashish, and it's been around for 30 or 40 years or more. It's a organization in Jerusalem which provides opportunities for elderly people to come and work, to make crafts and to do other things. Then they sell a lot of those crafts, and they provide food and they provide other services for elderly people in Jerusalem. But it's one of the unique things about it is they try to find things for them to do. So they're not just receiving the things they need, but they're also staying engaged and working. And of course, there's a wonderful community there. So I felt in the TBI felt it would be a really nice way to thank you, not only for what you bring and brought to this series of discussions, but for all the work that you do.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Annette, can we go back to questions and comments?
Sure.
Okay, Barbara Taffet, yes.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. This has really been, as Judy said, a very beautiful series. And I learned a lot, but I wanted to backtrack to something that Rabbi Mishkin and I were talking about just the other day. There is a wonderful program. It happens occasionally. It is Learning with Grandparents. It's run by Hadar. You can find Hadar at hadar.org. It's geared for children ages 7 and older. And it happens a few times a year, like maybe every 6 weeks or so. You can sign up at hadar.org to be on their mailing list. The way it works is you register for each session and you provide information about your grandchildren and probably their parents' email. And when the day comes, the day before, you get a study sheet, and the kids get it through their parents' email. And then when the day comes, you get onto Zoom. There's a 3-minute introduction by one of the faculty, and then you go into a breakout room with your grandchildren and you work through the study sheet. And as I said, it's for children ages 7 and up. My grandchildren are teenagers, and we have done this several times this year. So it's something for all ages. And the one that was for last night, I sent Rabbi Mishkin the questions, was really about some of the things we're talking about. Things that happened in your family that you know about before you were born. Just like we know about the story of Passover with the Exodus from Mitzrayim, which we were not there to witness. So I definitely recommend, if you have a grandchild, and also if they live far away. Rabbi Kirshan, one of our former rabbis, does this regularly with his grandchildren in Israel. So it's a wonderful way to connect. I can't recommend it highly enough. And if you need more information, hadar.org, or if you can't remember that, just let me know and I'll tell you all about it.
Thank you.
Thanks again for this program. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Barbara. That's really helped. That really sounds like a very valuable program. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Yes, Harriet. Harriet?
I just wanted to say that I never knew I was doing an ethical will when I started doing my biography in Rhyme, which was meant kind of, I guess, as a legacy for my grandchildren. It never occurred to me to call it that. I was just started to write and wanted them to know me as a person other than being Nana. And so I started doing that, and I just got so much from these classes. It was really wonderful, very thought-provoking, and very interesting. Thank you all, for all of your work and what you did. It was really great. I just wanted to say thank you very, very much.
And thank you for your comments, Harriet. At different classes, they were really interesting. Yes.
Alan.
So first, Annette, I want to say thank you for this series. It was really quite interesting. The 2 sessions that I sat in on, I really learned a lot. But I have 2 questions, if I may, for Susan on ethical wills. One is, are these typically shared before a person passes?
I always had thought they weren't, but I was doing a little extra reading, and I've seen that they are sometimes shared. So certainly, I know, and it's what you want to do with them. So they could be shared beforehand.
Okay. And is there a typical length? Are they multiple pages or?
I don't know. I don't know if there is really a typical length. Some of the resource, if you look at some of the books out there, they have ethical wills in them. They have examples, and some are shown to be like just a paragraph, just something handwritten. To perhaps a family member. Right. And others, I think, were probably longer. So I think, it's whatever someone wants to do, what's meaningful for them, what they're comfortable doing. what they
Okay,
want to
thank-
share. So it's really, it's
Okay.
up to
So
the person.
whatever fits, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Okay,
I
thank
would
you.
actually argue that the ethical will of the daughters of Zelophehad was to Nulanu, give us the land. And that was their ethical will,
Right.
that they wanted to maintain their family's existence. So that would be one line.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
I,
Thank you.
I believe that the ethical will is a daily will. The way you behave in everyday life teaches your children what you believe. And I think that's a very important thing to remember when you're going off the track every once in a while, that you really share with your children your knowledge by the things that you do with them and for them, and give them an understanding of why you are who you are and why they are behaving the way they are behaving. Some of it is because of what you do, and you have to remember that always. Anyway.
Well said.
Good point. Yes.
Rabbi Jack Riemer, he spells his last name Riemer, has a book on Jewish ethical wills. He also actually has a book on death and dying too. That's very good. And in his book on ethical wills, he has about 30 or 40 from different time periods in the book. But one of the things he says in the introduction, it's, certainly, and this is partly what I was saying, some of it's just who we are and how we behave in the world. But he said that, he's been involved in activities where he encourages people at synagogues to write ethical wills, and then he hears back from people. And one of the things he was surprised with is that some of the time, not all the time, but some of the time, parents will share them with their children after they write them, which I think is a really good thing to do, because it can allow for conversation, which after you've died, it's very powerful, maybe even powerful in a different way, but you can't have that same kind of conversation. But he said there were times where kids would say to their parents, "Oh, we didn't know that was so important to you." And they'd be like, "What do you mean you didn't know that was so important to me?" So even sometimes when we think we're giving a message to our kids through our words or our actions, hopefully most of the time we are, but it's clear that some of the time in some situations we're not telling them how deeply we feel about something, even though we may have thought we did.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for participating. Thank the teachers for teaching. And if any of you actually have ideas or desires for another class, you can always email me. Can't promise anything, but I'd love to hear some people's ideas. And I just want to wish you a Zis Pesach, a happy, healthy holiday, and all good things. So thank you very much.
Amen.